Good evening, everybody. I'm Nick Seabrook, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Office of Public Policy Events here at UNF, which is sponsoring tonight's panel discussion. Our topic for this evening's event is TikTok on Trial, the Future of Social Media Regulation. Earlier today, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral arguments in the case of TikTok versus Garland, a challenge to the legislation passed in April of this year, directing the Chinese company ByteDance to divest from the TikTok platform or face the prospect of the app being banned in the United States in January 2025. Social media regulation has been a topic on the national agenda for a number of years, with concerns over national security, content moderation, privacy and data security, the effects on mental health of young Americans, and other public policy concerns all rising to the forefront. Joining me this evening to discuss this topic is a distinguished panel of policymakers and experts from government, nonprofit advocacy, and academia, here to present differing and diverse perspectives on how society should grapple with the challenges and opportunities posed by social media. Our panel includes Florida Secretary of State Cord Byrd, a native of the Jacksonville Beaches and a graduate of the University of North Florida and St. Thomas University School of Law. Secretary Byrd is a fifth-generation Floridian and represented Northeast Florida in the State House of Representatives from 2016 to 2022, when he was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis as Florida's 37th Secretary of State. Also joining us this evening is Florida Education Association President Andrew Spar. President Spar is a graduate of The Ohio State University and began his career in education as an elementary school music teacher in Daytona Beach, Florida. In 2003, he was elected as the president of his local union, Volusia United Educators, and served in that position for 15 years before being elected vice president of the Florida Education Association in 2018, then taking over as its president 2 years later. The third member of our panel is Dr. Wanju Shi from UNF. Dr. Shi is an assistant professor of public administration and graduated with a bachelor's degree in electronic information and engineering from Shanghai Normal University, a master's degree in public administration from Southeast Missouri State University, and she received her PhD in public affairs from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Shi's research focuses on social media use by government and nonprofits, nonprofit management and fundraising, and public health management. She joined the UNF faculty in 2022. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to tonight's panel, Cord Byrd, Andrew Spar, and Wanju Shi. So tonight's event will consist of about 60 minutes of discussion with our panel, followed by 30 minutes for the audience to ask any questions that they might want to ask of tonight's participants. But I'd like to begin this evening's discussion with the federal legislation that was the subject of today's court hearing in DC, where TikTok was quite literally on trial. Earlier this year, Congress passed and President Biden signed bipartisan legislation targeting the social media platform TikTok and directing the Chinese parent company ByteDance to divest from the service by early 2025. And so the question I want to put to our panel is, what are some of the concerns that are raised by the Chinese Communist Party's reported influence over ByteDance and the TikTok platform, and whether this bill effectively addresses those? Also, what are some of the legal questions that are coming up in this particular court case? TikTok, on the one side, is arguing that it's a violation of the First Amendment free speech rights, both of it as a corporation and of its users, for the federal government to effectively ban the platform. The government has countered that this bill is vital for protecting national security. So beginning then with Secretary Byrd, Florida has been at the forefront of the efforts in the US to regulate both social media generally and TikTok specifically. And we'll get to some of the regulatory debates here in Florida later on. But first of all, what are your thoughts on this federal bill and the broader debate about TikTok?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be with y'all as an alumnus tonight. And just want to say, since I know we're being recorded, so any opinion that I give tonight is mine and mine alone. I don't speak for the state of Florida or for the administration. Just want to make that clear. These are my opinions. So you mentioned in the setup bipartisanship. So when I looked and I was doing my research on this, I mean, the regulation of TikTok has broad bipartisan support in Congress. And I was just there last week, Tuesday and Wednesday, testifying before Congress. The animosity you would not believe. So it's interesting to me that there is bipartisan support on regulating what is essentially a Chinese Communist Party owned entity. And so, for example, Secretary of State Blinken said, quote, TikTok should be ended one way or another. The Treasury Department said it is a safeguard. We need to do this to safeguard national security. And Chinese law actually requires companies to do whatever the CCP wants them to do in terms of sharing information or serving as a tool of the Chinese government. So I think we have to understand as Americans that this isn't a company that's regulated the same way that American companies are. There are no independent companies in China under the Chinese Communist Party. They ultimately dictate and control every company. And just because one of the things I read I thought was interesting, it's not a smoking gun. TikTok is a loaded gun, meaning that the app is there, and it doesn't mean they're breaking the law or using it as a spy tool now, but certainly all of the mechanisms are in place for them to do that should the Chinese Communist Party want to eventually use it for that purpose.
So President Spar, I know you're a TikTok user yourself. And earlier this year, you posted a video on TikTok, the subject of which was this bill that was passed through Congress. Unfortunately, I was unable to watch that video because TikTok is blocked on all UNF devices and networks. So maybe you could give the audience an idea of what it was that you said, given that, at least if they're using UNF network access, they have been unable to watch that video on campus.
So first of all, Dr. Seabrook, thanks for having us here, and to UNF, thanks for hosting this. I think this is an important conversation, and I think it's an important conversation, as is the entire conversation around social media and the use of social media. There's no doubt that TikTok is a very popular platform. I just want to kind of ask, how many of you in here are on TikTok or have a TikTok account? Yeah, so more than half the room, right? And it is a way that a lot of people are communicating. They're communicating about hobbies and things they like. They're communicating about real world issues. And so this idea of TikTok really has embedded itself in our society. And so I think, as Mr. Secretary said, there are certainly some security concerns, right? There are security concerns around all these platforms, and especially with TikTok, because it is ultimately owned by a company out of China, and the impact that China government has on its businesses. The question has to be, is there a balance? And is there a balance to ensure that this country's interests are protected, that the citizens of this country, the users of TikTok or any platform, are protected, and at the same time that we are able to continue to express our free opinion in the ways that we find are the best way to do so. What I find is that, especially with my two young daughters, both of who watch TikTok, they're not actively using the platform other than to watch what other people are doing. But they also use Instagram and other platforms as a way to communicate. And they do regularly take the crazes, if you will, that you see on TikTok, and use it in their own life as well as a form of entertainment and such. So I think it's a real conversation to be had. I also think that as a government, as a lot of entities are very slow to react to how fast technology is developing, and specifically in this case, how quickly TikTok spread and became popular. And before a blink of an eye, there are millions and millions of users, and now the government's saying, hold on, we should look at this. And so there's certainly a question to be had there as well.
So Dr. Sher, your research focuses on social media and social media usage. And when you and I were on the radio this morning on First Coast Connect, you talked a little bit about some of the unique challenges that TikTok, as a Chinese company subject to Chinese law, faces when attempting to operate in the United States. And so what is it that makes TikTok different from other social media companies, and how does that affect this current dispute over whether TikTok should be allowed to continue to operate in the US?
First, thank you for having me here. As a previous panelist has already mentioned, that TikTok is a Chinese-owned technology company. But the Chinese government claimed that they only own 1% of the stake of the entire company, and 99% of the stake is actually owned by the technology company itself. They also TikTok as a social media platform is not only facing Chinese users or American users. The influence of this platform is actually go around the whole world. So the challenge that they met in the United States, they also met in other countries as well. So I think this topic right now, the issues, debates being raised up in the United court system is very relevant, and it's going to have a big impact around the world social media users. TikTok is different than other social media platforms has been mentioned here, such as Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Not because the algorithm has been designed differently on that social media platform, but also that the data being upheld is by a foreign country. So this is not going to be the first time or the last time that United States will face a foreign technology company. It's going to conduct a business with this country. And it's also going to impact on how U.S. Technology companies going to conduct their business activities in other countries. So I think it's very important to set up some of the regulations and rules at this point and looking forward. As Andrew mentioned, that government usually react a little bit slow. So especially on the technology part, I would like to see how moving forward, the government agencies can taking some active moves to protect social media users' data privacy and safety, but also protect our rights to free share our voice, to giving the message as what we want it to.
So one of the central issues in that lawsuit is this idea of how we balance the First Amendment rights, both of companies that operate social media platforms and regular Americans who use those platforms, versus the harms or potential harms of social media that government may want to mitigate through regulation. And we'll return to that broader theme later on in our discussion. For now, I'll just note that, as I said, this is an ongoing litigation, and the court is moving more quickly than usual in order to attempt to resolve this question before the January deadline. The DC Court of Appeals, as I said, heard arguments today in this case about whether the bill directing ByteDance to divest from TikTok or face the prospect of the service being shut down is unconstitutional or not. And they have promised to rule on that question before the deadline in January. But I'd like to turn our attention away from the federal level and look at how we've been confronting TikTok and indeed the question of social media regulation more generally here in the state of Florida. So Florida recently passed legislation restricting social media access for minors under the age of 14. Similarly, that bill said that minors who are 14 or 15 years of age would have to obtain parental permission before operating an account on any social media platform. And so I want to ask our panel, what are the negative effects of social media use among children and young teens? And how does this bill attempt to combat those? And how can we furthermore kind of balance those concerns from a regulatory standpoint with things like the rights of parents and free speech rights and the First Amendment in our society? And I'll ask that first to Secretary Byrd.
Well, thank you, and I'll date myself a little bit, but so I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm very thankful that I grew up as a child without the influences of social media. So I have a 10-year-old daughter, and very cognizant of how much time she spends online, what she's looking at, all the parental controls. But when I talk to other parents that have children either similar age or older, and they talk about with their teenagers or now college-age children, how they wished they had known then what they know now. You see there are attention deficit issues regarding social media. I mean, the algorithms are designed to keep you watching, to keep you engaged with the content provider. I know the bill you're specifically referencing is House Bill 3. I was not there in the House at the time, but I know everyone who did it. And once again, you talk about bipartisanship. That bill passed 109 to 5 in the Florida House and 30 to 4 in the Florida Senate. So once again, you see that this has broad bipartisan support of regulating what children can see while they're in school. And one of the big focuses was on the access to pornography. When I was in school and you wanted to see something you shouldn't, you had to make extra effort. Now, we walk around with devices where you have everything imaginable in the history of the world at your fingertips. And there is, an issue of age appropriateness for students. And so the state felt as if it was necessary to put certain restrictions to assist parents. I mean, I remember there was testimony from parents who said it's very challenging. They didn't understand. They didn't know. They wanted the help from the government to understand and to have access to the tools necessary to restrict certain applications and content from their young children.
I agree with the Secretary on the fact that this was a bipartisan issue, and there's definitely parents who are concerned, and I think part of it is kind of something we've created as a society. Let's face it, when we started getting devices, it was put it in front of the kid as a way to have the kid entertained while the parents were doing something else, and so it's kind of a byproduct, I think, of that kind of mindset when we were as these devices were coming online. As an educator, here's what I know. There is no doubt that it has an impact on students and on student learning and on bullying and on impacts like that. I'm not sure I agree with the idea that we should have a complete ban for children under the age of 14. I'm not opposed to it. I think there should be more conversation in that regard. And I wish there was consistency in how the government approached all things, because there are some things where we're saying parents have ultimate rights, and in other cases we're saying we're going to limit parents' rights. I think there needs to be consistency on what is really parents' rights. And I think it should be around the issues I just mentioned. I think it should be around the issues of the health and well-being of every student. We are dealing right now with an epidemic in our schools in which threats are being made of harm to other students, to teachers, to staff, and those are often being made on social media right now. And so something has to be done. And it's not going to happen just by passing a law. One thing I know about kids is they're very creative, and they will find ways to get around systems. So, for example, no school district in Florida, for as long as I can remember, has allowed kids to get on social media in schools, in our K-12 schools, our pre-K through 12 schools. Even though the law says they can't, they already weren't, because school districts block that. But kids just simply turn off the Wi-Fi on their device and they can do whatever they want during the day, right? Those are the kinds of things that are happening. Even though we have laws that say cell phones are not to be out during the school day now, we know that kids find ways to get around that, either through smart watches or other technology. The technology is evolving faster than we're able to keep up with it. And what we really need to do is bring everyone together. Bring parents together, bring educators together, bring students at the appropriate age together, and talk about how we really approach this issue as a whole so that we're looking out for kids, we're ensuring their ability to interact, because it is a different way to interact today. But we also have to make sure we're keeping them safe. Safe from bullying, safe from other harm, safe from predators, safe from all the things we know happen on social media platforms, TikTok included. And how do we do it in a way that's responsible and involves everyone? Because everyone has a part in this. It's not just the government's responsibility, and parents want help in doing this. And it's not just the school's responsibility. It's got to be a community effort.
All right. So my perspective is more from a research perspective, so it's more neutral. I would not entirely against or ban TikTok or any social media, or simply just say, let's just support it, let it run freely. Research have shown a mixed findings on social media influence, especially on young folks. So some study find that social media does increasing the depression and mental health issue, especially in young children. They also find that social media affect students' learning abilities, especially on self-control. This is the real challenge I met when I was teaching class as well. I teach both face-to-face and online. On the online class design, I've been told that for any online lectures, you should not post a video longer than 6 minutes. 6 minutes, what you can learn. So I have to chop a long structure or chapter strategically to constantly getting students' attention. So a lot of research actually focus on understanding why social media is so addictive, especially to young people. You might not be aware of that I mentioned the algorithm designed is a teamwork. It's not just technology company is involved. Psychiatrists behind of it too, social behavior researchers behind too. They try to understand what content specifically designed to make you feel you achieve a challenge. That's why the challenge activity is very popular on TikTok. You see like small kids or young children trying to achieve those challenge to feel that special achievement. You also feel that the length of the video is designed as purposely to chip it short, so it make you want to watch more. It make you want to watch couple seconds, and then you wonder what's going on, and it's only going to take another couple seconds, so let me try to browse another one, right? But on the other hand, there's also research find that education perspective or educators like me may be able to find some way to integrate the TikTok in or social media platforms in general to teach. So there are studies find in nursing school, for example. Nursing medical school sounds really hard concept to understand, and students usually try resistance on understanding hard things. So if professors or instructors find a way to create a series of small video clips, it may motivate or get students' attention at the beginning of the topic. So it can continuously dragging students' attention and increasing their studying motivations. However, it is more work than just a short video clip. We can never design a class by just teaching through small video clip. It has to be a combination of multiple different methods. There's also study find out that social media can be a great raising awareness too. So earlier I mentioned that it is true, especially during the COVID study find out there's more young people has the cyberbullying issues during this time. But in Indonesia, they actually having a nationwide awareness event by using TikTok to raising the cyberbully issues online. There are more young people actually engaging and be aware of that issue. So in the end, TikTok and any other social media tool is a tool. Depending on policymakers, depending on the users nowadays, and also different actors in the society, as Andrew said earlier, that it's a society issue that we need to work together. And I often think from policy part, banning is one policy tool. There are other type of policy tool to be implemented as well to regulate our social behavior. So there are more explorations that we should go through on behalf of this topic.
So continuing then with the theme of TikTok regulation and social media regulation here in Florida, and thinking specifically about schools. So HB3 that we just talked about is legislation that's aimed kind of broadly at social media use by minors, and deals with some of the negative externalities like mental health effects potentially that can cause. But social media use and cell phone use in K through 12 schools is also something that's regulated, as Andrew mentioned, and has been for a long time. The use of TikTok is prohibited in all K through 12 schools here in the state of Florida, including on both personal devices and devices that are owned or provided by the schools themselves. But Andrew mentioned the challenges of enforcing such a ban and the ways that students can get around it. So what effects, kind of piggybacking off our last question, does the use of phones and social media apps in schools have on student learning and the learning environment? And given the challenges that we've addressed, is the place where we're heading a situation where you just have to take the phones away from kids in schools entirely, take them in the morning, give them back at the end of the day? Is that the only way that we can address the negative effects that apps like TikTok have on learning in schools? Or are there other ways that we can potentially keep some of the benefits of these apps and reduce those harms without taking such drastic steps as banning cell phones in schools entirely?
I'll start. So this is where I think it gets really interesting. As I've talked to teachers all around the state, there's no question that students, especially in our pre-K through 12 schools, and I say pre-K through 12, that's our schools, there are kids in kindergarten that come with cell phones. And they have apps on here and they're doing things on it all the time. There's no question. And parents all make decisions as to when they think it's more appropriate for their child to have a phone. My daughters did not have phone till well into middle school. And even at that, it was monitored by my wife and I, and their use was limited based on what we set as parameters. So there's no question that the phones are a distraction in the classroom, and kids, when they have them, tend to pull them out at various times. Maybe it's in between lessons. Maybe there's a substitute in the classroom. They use it to communicate with their parents. Some parents expect it. If they're not feeling well, they're expecting their kid to say, hey, I'm in third period, but I'm not feeling well right now. Can you come get me? Rather than going to the nurse's office as we used to do when you weren't feeling well. And if that was determined to be the case, they would call home and speak to your parent or call them at work to come get them. But parents have an expectation too. I think parents have an expectation that they can get a hold of their kids and their kids can get a hold of them whenever they need to. And for some parents, Again, with some of the threats we've seen in our schools with school shootings, parents very often push back on the idea of saying that kids should not have phones during the day. So you've watched schools implement strategies where, the kids have to keep them away, they have to keep them off, and the only time they can access them is at the end of the day, before school and after school. Some allow use during lunch, and we're seeing different approaches to this. Again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. It takes the entire community. And I think because we're not having conversations and because we're not talking about what makes the most sense, how do parents parent around the use of cell phones and apps? How do students interact? As Dr. Shea was saying, Dr. Scher was saying, I'm sorry, the idea that there is research out there and there are ways out there to use the technology to help us in communicating with students, I think is really important because we don't hear that conversation very often. And yet we talk as educators all the time how important it is to meet students where they are. If we're going to excite them and connect them to their learning, we've got to know where they are, what they're connected to. And so I think that is part of the conversation. I don't think a simple ban necessarily works because, like I said, kids are going to find their way around it. And I think there has to be a partnership in how we approach this. And we also have to talk to students because when students do make threats, and we're seeing it more and more, but when there are threats that have been made on social media, more and more students are starting to realize they need to report that's serious, that they don't want something happening in their school or harming them or their classmates. I think that is vitally important in that conversation. So how can we use social media as a leverage, if you will, in the education process? How do we make sure that we're connecting with students? And how do we make sure we have a whole wraparound conversation about solutions? I subscribe to the practice that the smartest person in the room is the room. And so if we have the right people in the room, if we have students in the room of the appropriate age, if we have parents in the room, if we have educators in the room, if we have administrators in the room, if we have content experts in the room, and researchers in the room, then I bet you we can find a lot of solutions to some of the challenges we have right now that we haven't even thought of.
So I think for what I mentioned earlier, the negative effect on social media and some positive effect as well, it is on, education system's shoulders to actually how to mobilize the social media effect on students at school systems. I agree that simply ban a device or a tool is never going to work. It's only going to make people want more. That's just a human being. The more you ban something, the more people are wanted. So we don't want to that backfire on the education system. I think raising the awareness is very important. A lot of us may not fully understand social media or the tool before we even make actions. We just saw other people use it. We hear that, especially from older generation, no offense on, I consider myself as old enough that I'm not Gen Z anymore. I don't understand Gen Z, a lot of things. But it is true that social media, especially when today we talk about TikTok, they were targeting specifically on younger generations compared to other social media. Like Facebook is already kind of fade out, is only for older folks, right? So that's to say the younger folks are more vulnerable compared to adults. That's a truth. That's because when we were young, our brain function was not fully developed. That's true science too. So it is hard for young people, children's, especially people under a certain age, can develop that self-control behaviors without any involvement, without any help from parents and school systems. So design a supportive system to using social media to guide children's or young people using social media is very urgent. If you're looking at a college level, some of the professors have actively included social media as one of the topic, regardless across the discipline. So I teach in public administration. So there are classes specifically designed for teaching how public sectors government organizations should using social media to engaging with citizens. In political science, there are classes designed for how politicians can using social media to mobilize voters. So in all kinds of different disciplines, we were trying to embed the importance of using social media. I think the only better way to maximize the benefits of a tool, again, is to actually understand a lot of the logic, the research behind of it is the way to go.
And I don't disagree with anything the other two panelists have said. So I'll come at this from a policymaker. You know, when you're thinking about the state of Florida, third largest state in the country, to come up with a consistent policy that can fit the schools and communities in the Panhandle and schools and communities in South Florida, very different, very challenging. But what you want is a consistent policy. So what happens and these things are ubiquitous. They're not going away. Kids are really smart. They're going to find a way around them. But what teachers and administrators need is a consistent rule and a policy that if a student is violating or using it too much or taking it out in class or showing other students things that they shouldn't be, legally you have to have a policy that you can point to so that it doesn't look haphazard or targeted or haphazard or targeted.
Okay, well, I appreciate our experts' answers. For what it's worth, I think we should just take the phones away in schools. But I also recognize that as someone who's not a parent or a K through 12 school teacher, I would not have to enforce that particular policy. So I will defer to those with greater expertise than I. So it's one thing then to think about social media use by minors and TikTok use by minors specifically. There are very different concerns, perhaps, than some of the additional restrictions on the app that we've seen here in the state of Florida. So if I pull out my cell phone right now and attempt to either use the TikTok app or go to tiktok.com, my phone will give me an error message saying that I don't have permission to access that because I am connected to the UNF Wi-Fi. If I take my UNF issued iPad or laptop home and connect it to my home Wi-Fi network and attempt to do the same thing, I will similarly get an error message that I'm blocked from accessing TikTok because I am using a UNF device. And similar policies are in place across the state university system. And I believe in Florida state government agencies and other units of the state of Florida government. So here we're not talking about minors. We're not talking about kids in school. We're talking about adults. We're talking about students at colleges and universities. We're talking about faculty members, staff members. We're talking about state employees. Are these types of TikTok restrictions a form of censorship? And are they likely to be effective when, even more so than students in public schools that are at least reasonably closely supervised by their teachers, their school officials, but when a student can simply turn off the Wi-Fi on their phone and access TikTok anyway, what exactly is the point of these kinds of policies at various different levels of the administrative state here in Florida?
So for me, I really see this discussion as one of national security. So as the Secretary of State, I'm Florida's Chief Elections Officer, and you may have noticed in the news we have a little election coming up in about less than 55 days. So there are 4 countries around the world that are consistently attempting to gain access to our systems, to manipulate and influence our elections: Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. So when we talk about restrictions on government use, I mean, I don't have access to those things. There are many things as a government employee that I don't have access to because we have systems and there are people all over the world that they spend all of their time trying to hack into our systems. So if you give them a gateway, they will find a way eventually. So I think it's a reasonable restriction on adult use by government workers when you're on government time and it's taxpayer funded, because my devices, university devices, are all taxpayer funded. So the legislators, the people that we elect to represent us in Tallahassee, have made a determination that TikTok has the potential for misuse, and so I think it is a reasonable restriction, and I don't think it's censorship under the First Amendment. And that's an area of law that I practice. We have time, place, and manner restrictions on your speech. So no one's telling you can't say to do or access certain materials when you're off work. But when you're in work, there are all kind of things, not only social media, but a whole host of other things that we as the government tell our employees that they can and what they can and can't do when they are on taxpayer time. So I think it is a reasonable restriction to prevent use and access on government devices. One, for security reasons, and then two, just for employment and harmony in the workplace reasons.
And I'm going to go at it from a slightly different perspective, but I actually agree with the secretary on this. And this is the angle I'm going to go for it as a union president. I tell our union members all the time, and I know other leaders, and we have some here, do the same thing. These are devices that are owned by the university or a school district or a government entity. And so my advice always, first of all, is never do any personal business on a work issued device. Even in the private sector, I would say the same thing. Never do any personal business on a work related device. And I say that from a union perspective, because my whole thing is it's not your device, and when they get it back, they're going to get information off of it that you may not want them to have. So why give them that information? So that's on that. And then on the networks, again, if it's not the only way for people to communicate, and there is a question, right, about especially in poorer communities when access to the internet is not equal to what we see in other areas. And so I absolutely think there has to be a conversation as what is the purpose of the access to the internet. And it's certainly not fair if people with means have the ability to get on the internet and go anywhere they want, and those who don't have means are restricted. That to me is an inequity, and we've got to address that. But at the same time, when we're talking about schools, whether it's the University of North Florida or any other university in the state or college, or even in our pre-K through 12 systems, that's their network, and we're granted access for work purposes or learning purposes. And so I don't really object too much, because again, I often, in my opinion, worry about the idea that someone's watching what you're doing. And I'd rather us be able to do our own personal things on our personal devices, our personal networks, where there are security protocols and government protections, so that someone can't just come and see what you're doing. But when you do it through a government network, or you do it through a government issued device, they can see what you're doing all the time. And is that really what you want?
All right, so I'm going to go on my personal experience. I just came a funny time and a funny position because I originally from China. When Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is a thing, I was not able to access to any of this in my own country. So I have that personal experience that government banned a type of social media entirely that I cannot access to. The feeling, once I got into America, I immediately download all those social media, just curious about what the heck they were trying to hide over there. Well, I did find they hide a lot of information that I think any government wanted to filter certain of information to, hide whatever they think is dangerous, ugly, or they don't want to share with their citizens. I truly believe every nation have that concern. So it's not a pleasant pleasure. I certainly do not want people here in the United States lose the rights of using social media that you want. But I do wanted to warn everyone, be aware that what information you consume on social media. So right now, we heard a lot of policy under the assumption that we are vulnerable, means that We saw a piece of information, we are easily being influenced. We don't think. And that's what in college level, all the faculties tried so hard to challenge you guys, saying, we want you build the critical thinking skill. We want you begin to rethink what you saw, question everything you saw. And I think that need to be emphasized in the education system and needed to be emphasized through young age, that not just simply block it, but giving you the chance to explore and questioning about it. And I think that's the direction that educators should go to. Also, when I say you know what the information you consume, that's the other thing is social media is different than traditional media. Traditional media, you are just an information consumer. You read the information, you analyze it, and then you try to process it. But on social media, you are also the content generator. You might not realize that you are influencing others. You are also information generators. So when they say they can spy you, for sure, I have no doubts. I've been, watched by both governments, my old Chinese government, and here in the U.S., I think they're watching me too. So I've been double watched, which I don't mind. But again, that's does not taking the power away me as a social media user. At the same time, I have some freedom here in this country that I can generate the content and speak for what I want it for. And that's important, often being forgot by, policy designers need to consider about that. Different than traditional media, social media is changing the game, that citizens' role is changing. You are not the one the policy can go top down anymore. You are the one influencing policy design too, because you now have the power to create the information. So do be careful what you post on there, because a study actually showed both TikTok, which is why it got a lot of attention. And anyone want to guess which the other social media collect the most of your personal information other than TikTok? No, it's not Facebook. Not Instagram, because Facebook and Instagram are the same. YouTube. You might not realize that YouTube constantly access to your IP address, your location, your demographic information, so they can use an algorithm calculate what you like, what you want to watch more. Similarly as TikTok, and TikTok algorithm is different than other technology company. That's another reason that this such a hot topic is. I think the U.S. government is trying to say not only just ban TikTok. They say if TikTok agree to sell the ownership to United States, then you guys can using TikTok again. The TikTok on the other side is saying that we actually try to protect your data to share on, based on Texas project. We, allocate your data in United States only. But there are evidence find out that Chinese staff in the, that company can access to United States users' data. So again, the question coming to you are not only a consumer, you are also a generator. You are giving away your information. You are also gaining the information. I think everyone needed to start building that skill by actually understand how to filter the information for yourself.
I just want to add one thing to what Dr. Scher was saying, because I think it's really important, and the secretary commented on this as well, but this idea that there's bad actors out there. And then not only are there bad actors out there, other countries, and arguably there may even be some bad actors within our country. And these are individuals who are putting out intentionally false information, misinformation, and that's where the concern comes in, because they do have access to a lot of data. I mean, whether you know it or not, the political ads you see on social media are driven by the algorithms that they have, and politicians pay for political ads to target certain people who either think like them or will promote what they're saying. But you also have bots out there that are continually sharing information with the intent, and we know that's how Iran and Russia and China and some of the other countries who have been trying to influence what's happening in the United States have been operating under, right? They create all of these bots, and now with AI, which was a whole other subject, that's going to even elevate that more. How do we know that the person we're seeing or the voice we're hearing is really that person? So that's something I think Dr. Scher is right. We have to get a lot smarter in how we do this. We have to build it in, and it really goes back into, I think, our curriculum in the education system. What are we doing to help prepare students for what's coming up? What are we doing as a society to help everyone? We know that people often targeted are our parents, our grandparents, maybe even great-grandparents, right? If they're still around. Those are people who are targeted by some of these technologies as a way to steal from them. That happens on a regular basis, hoping they'll fall for it. And so what are we doing as a society, both policy-wise and then academic-wise, to educate people around how we better approach the use of technology and become really George Carlin, great comedian, one of his sayings all the times is teach kids to question everything. And I think we really are at that point. We have to question everything.
So we, in our discussion here tonight, have used the phrase social media platform a lot. And the word platform, I think, is perhaps somewhat misleading here. And the panel kind of touched on this in their most recent round of answers, because it kind of implies that the social media company is something passive that's just hosting things that other people want to say. Whereas the truth is that these companies are very active participants in terms of deciding what it is that we as social media users actually see, get exposed to, what shows up in our feeds. They're not only employing these algorithms to determine what content appears and where the infinite scroll eventually ends up taking us, but they're also engaging in content moderation. They're making decisions about what kinds of speech and what kinds of speakers are and are not allowed on their platform. And this idea of content moderation and regulating that is another area where the state of Florida has been particularly active. You may recall earlier this year, a US Supreme Court decision focusing on the question of the extent to which states, specifically Florida and Texas, are able to regulate the way that social media companies moderate their platforms. And Florida has argued that platforms should be prohibited from engaging in certain kinds of content moderation and deplatforming certain types of users based on their speech. And so I'll pose this question initially to Secretary Byrd, given his First Amendment expertise. But are social media platforms public forums that should be broadly protective of the free speech rights of their users? Or are they more like publishers that have the right to exercise editorial control over what appears in people's feeds?
Well, that is the $64,000 question, and it's the one that Congress has had a very difficult time debating. You were talking about Section 230 of federal law, and that's the Section 230, and I'm not sure exactly when it was written, but probably 30 years ago in the very earliest stages of the internet and social media didn't even exist then. So what I find is that a lot of these social media companies, they want to be publishers when it suits them legally, and they want to be platforms when it suits them legally. And so they bounce back and forth, and they make contradictory arguments when it suits them. And so we either have this, well, I have this notion that you have a property interest in certain things that you do, and I don't know that we shouldn't wrestle with this idea of the digital public square, in that you have maybe a right to your persona and the things that you say in the digital space, and that others can't censor that. And as I can tell you, as someone who's run for office, it is very concerning if you put certain ideas down or out there, that social media companies can throttle up and down that message, or in some cases, completely ban those messages while completely ignoring it from another candidate that social media company agrees with. So really, this begins with Congress, and they need to go and update this law. Because until they do, you're going to continue to have this debate, and the social media companies will pick and choose when they want to be a platform and when they want to be a publisher.
So I'm going to go a slightly different way on that. I think that's part of commerce in the United States that we often hear about, right? There are laws that prevent businesses from discriminating against individuals based on certain protected classes, right? You can go to a restaurant and they have signs, they have the right to refuse service to anyone, for example, right? But if they are only refusing service to women, they would be violating the law, right? They can't discriminate based on that. And I think that becomes the question for social media. Are there limits in terms of that aspect, or do they have the right of a business to say, I don't agree with that? There are businesses that support certain political candidates and not others. Does that mean social media platforms, TikTok or others, can't say, we don't agree with this particular candidate, so we're not going to promote them? That's where the question comes into play. When you look at standard media, if you will, when you look at television networks and stuff, they have obligations under the law in terms of equal time and stuff for political candidates. But this has become more of a political question around politics than I think anything else, because that's where it's centered. And of course, then you have politicians who are trying to make this decision. Can they or can't they limit what decisions social media platforms have when it comes to political speech? And it is a question to be debated, and I think it really comes into, are these platforms part of the social fabric and therefore are more of a social square in which we communicate and advocate and should have different ideas? Or is it a company-owned business? And it goes to what I think the secretary was saying. Is it a company-owned business and the company gets to decide they support this or they don't support this? And as long as they're not discriminating in some fashion, then we'll have to see. I don't think there's any laws right now that say that if someone says, I don't like this point of view, then I'm not going to allow that point of view to be heard, that would be a form of discrimination, unless it was, again, specific to say, I'm not going to allow a particular race to have a say, or a particular gender, or et cetera. And so I think that's where the debate has to go. I do think it's going to take more than just politicians. I think it's a community kind of debate that has to happen.
I only have one thing to add it on, is that I understand that no nation citizens want their data being shared, controlled, influenced by another nation. But I have a question in general for everyone here. If you are not okay that Chinese government own your data or can access to your data, are you okay that American government can access to your data and own your data? At one point, you're comfortable that your own government can access to your data. And I think that's the debate should going on. And that's why the TikTok thing got a lot of attentions here, because I think other technology companies, the social media companies specifically, are watching for this case to see where it goes, because I think it will set up some stepstones for in the future how certain regulations or policies should be designed around the use of social media, or what information can be shared, or who can access to what information on social media.
Okay, so I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for our audience members to ask questions. So if you do have a question on your mind that you'd like to ask our panel, you can go ahead and come up to one of the two microphones that we have at the front here. So please do come up if you would like, and go ahead and ask your questions. And in the meantime, I'd like to once again thank our expert panel for sharing their thoughts and insights with you this evening.
Hello. My name is Kelly Gibbs. I'm a junior here, political science major. My question would be, since most of you are agreeing that TikTok should not be banned, what do you think maybe the alternatives would be that we can create here in the United States that will still entertain and allow people to share and communicate with each other, but have more control? Do you think there might be an alternative app that we can create in a home base that might be safer?
Oh, well, I just go at first because I, study different type of social media, and I often tell who want to using social media that each of them is different. Even though when we talk of TikTok, it's famous on short video clip, but other social media such as Instagram has Reel, and Facebook have Story, and such other YouTube even have short, right? So all those having similar functions, but their content generated are very different. How they attract the audience or the followers are very different. So there are a lot of companies here actually trying to be the competitor of TikTok already. And they were trying to adding on a lot of functions on the existing social media to compete with TikTok already. That's where you saw that Instagram Reel is really trying to compete with TikTok's functions. The core technology that TikTok owned is not shared with other technology companies in the United States. Yes, and I think that's another big, motivation here that why they wanted the downs sell the entire TikTok, including their technology algorithm, the way how they calculate collecting the data to United States. But I don't know that's going to happen because Chinese government also passing a law in either 2020 or 2017 saying that they own the intellectual property of the core technology owned by TikTok. But that doesn't not say that, other country cannot eventually develop a alternative social media platform to replace TikTok.
Well, I think, Kelly, you asked a very important question, and maybe somebody in this room will come up to the competitor that makes this whole argument moot, and that's great, and that's what we're looking for. I remember MySpace. I mean, that was one of the largest tech companies in the world at one time, and now it's not it's worth pennies. So yes, the tech space is moving very fast, and TikTok can be hot today and it could be gone tomorrow. But I still think the conversation is really important, especially when it comes to a foreign peer competitor that the government has identified as a risk, and whether or not. So I still think the conversation is worth it, even though the technology may end up solving the problem.
I think it's a great question as well, Kelly. Thank you for asking it. The interesting thing I notice on TikTok, and I don't post to TikTok that often. I don't have that kind of time to be that kind of influencer. But I will say this: when I look at TikTok accounts, there are people with TikTok's accounts, and then you look at their Instagram accounts, or you look at their YouTube accounts, or you look at their any of their other accounts that they have. They pale in comparison by the numbers that they have on TikTok. And so the reach of TikTok, excuse me, for so many individuals is just so much greater. And so I think we have to find a solution. I think there is an extremely valid concern about because of the security concerns with China. And so I think there's a real valid concern about how they're utilizing data that they're getting from the United States of America, and what kind of security risk that presents. But I also think, again, in the free market, if we had the competitor, I think they'd be out there right now. And maybe it hasn't been developed yet. As the secretary said, maybe it's coming. But look, this is part of the problem where I think we have to look at how we do business in general in the United States of America. I would imagine that 99% of the clothing that people are wearing in this room is not made in this country. And that's true. We saw with the chips when we had that massive shortage coming out of COVID, and we couldn't get iPhones, and we couldn't get new devices, and we couldn't get cars because all the chips are made overseas. And you have one issue and it disrupts the entire process. We are so reliant on it. So I think there is a lesson in here. And the lesson in here has to be, as we as a country have to look at how we compete globally, not just with social media platforms, but in general, and especially in the tech space, to make sure that we're on the cutting edge. What people look to the United States for over and over and over again is we are the entrepreneurs of the world. We are the people we have such ingenuity, such entrepreneurial spirit, such creative problem-solving solutions. That's what we've always done so well as a country, that other countries that are often pointed to that outperform us on test scores, they can't outperform us on how we problem solve. And so I think we can do it. I'm confident we as a society can do it. We just got to figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing is knowledge sharing based. Do you guys know before TikTok was developed or designed, there's another app actually first having that short video clip idea. It's called Vine. Yeah, so Vine was successful for a while. A lot of artists wanted to create short video content on there, but that company eventually lost the motivation to be innovative. One users at one point, the top one users, they are the social media influencer. They asked the company to pay for the money to the users so they can generate more attractive content. Vine back then refused that idea, and that's eventually causing those top users actually left the platform, and that's how the story of creating TikTok literally. So I think the competition itself actually should help in the development of the new technology. So I'm excited to see what's going on the next after the TikTok.
Mr. Secretary, Dr. Scher, I heard you, Mr. Secretary, talk about time, place, and manner restrictions being in use currently. I wanted to ask you about some other maybe caveats that we could use, such as least restrictive means tests. For instance, Dr. Scher, I hear you talk about the data these companies use. I hear concerns about national security, but data is a small word with big implications and many pieces. So under least restrictive means test, why haven't we evaluated which data specifically is a threat to our national security and sought to target that instead of a singular company?
That's a good question, but so I point to Huawei. So that's a Chinese company. They're a telecom company. They've been banned in the United States and most of the EU, if not all of the EU, because of the national security risks that they pose. I mean, some of the things that the concerns around TikTok are that the data collection, influence operations, or the ability to control software that's installed on devices. I mean, it is a real risk. I mean, when the Soviet Union was our chief competitor, we didn't have free trade with the Soviet Union. We make national security choices based upon wherever the threat is coming from at the time. This is a more challenging one because of, like I said, the ubiquitousness of internet and technology. But it doesn't change the fact that anybody who uses TikTok, and I do not have a TikTok account, I wouldn't, and I think it's a terrible idea for anyone to have one. They are collecting that data. They are creating a profile on each and every one of us. And people can laugh and think that it's not happening, but it's serious. And the Chinese government is building a profile on every single American. Why do you think that every one of these data breaches that we have, whether it's stealing our social security numbers, I just had to go in the other day and change every one of my passwords because I got an alert. Because I have one of the services that tells me, your social security number and your passwords have now shown up in a data link. Those are mainly coming from China and our other peer threats. We have to face the reality that we live in a dangerous world, and that just because the hook into our lives is funny cat videos or dancing videos, that doesn't mean that it's still not a dangerous threat. And if you look back throughout history, and we can pick the regimes throughout history that we would say, whoa, wait a minute, would we have allowed, Nazi Germany in the 1930s to, broadcast into the United States and not do anything about it? Of course we wouldn't. So we have to meet the technological threat where we face it and the enemies where we face them.
May I clarify real quick, please? So specifically, why aren't we targeting the specific dangerous information? So saying, okay, tracking location is bad for social media companies. No social media company is allowed to track location. Why aren't we doing that?
They cannot do that because social media algorithm was built based on your personal data. Otherwise, they won't even exist. All the social media companies originally needed to depending on your personal data to understand your online behavior. So it's funny that earlier I heard the case how your social security number is stolen. In today's society, you have your own identity. You also have your digital identity. So it is a concerning that you have to protect both of them. If you say, if we can not let the social media company access to, your personal data or dangerous data, is that safe? Well, data are linking to each other too. So, as you said earlier, mentioned that you might just watching a cat video, how that linking to your home address, how that linking to your, birthday information. I think that's the challenge that even the technology companies are facing is how to actually break the link of the database because you can't. Now we are really trying to advocate joining and sharing the database by using cloud system. So that's a challenge that many actors are facing together.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we're living in a surveillance economy. We have chosen this. We have chosen convenience over privacy. And that's just a statement of fact. I mean, I think one of the worst pieces of legislation that was passed in the last 25 years was the Patriot Act after 9/11. I think that we became comfortable with the government, our government, other governments surveilling and knowing everything about us at all times, but it's so difficult to break away. I mean, one of the things that we've looked at in the Florida legislature, and it was a huge fight, and I'm talking about American companies. I mean, they take our data. I mean, if you use an app, I mean, I'll just think of your favorite grocery store and you like to order your favorite sub. They keep all of that. They know every single thing that you're doing. And then they turn around and they monetize that and they sell that to other companies. And when we tried to put a stop to it, I mean, the amount of lobbyists that came in to Tallahassee would dwarf anything else I saw during my 6 years there. So, I mean, this is why I think we're having this debate tonight. So this just isn't just about TikTok. This is about, an entire surveillance economy and whether, how much of it are we comfortable with? And, I think that most Americans are comfortable with quite a lot of it.
I think the secretary just hit the nail on the head. It's ultimately about money. It's always about money. And to your point, look, the reality of it is identity theft is happening all the time. And it's not just happening through social media platforms. It's happening through banking. It's happening through credit cards. How many times have credit cards been hacked or a business? Target had a big one where they were hacked and anytime if you used a credit card in Target, your information was stolen. Those kinds of things are happening more and more, and yet I don't think there's been enough done certainly from the government perspective. I don't think they've done enough to ensure there are protections in place for our data, because we are becoming much more of a data-driven society. I hardly ever carry cash on me anymore, but my daughters don't even carry. My oldest is 21, and she doesn't even carry a credit card with her. She uses her phone for everything. Right? Like things are changing, and again, I think we tend to be behind those changes. How do we get in front of them to ensure that we are protected?
Hello, thank you all for coming and speaking on this issue. So I guess my question is directed more towards Secretary Byrd with your expertise in First Amendment. But when TikTok started to gain traction, other platforms like YouTube and Instagram realized the increase in engagement and the benefit to the short format for videoing, as Dr. Scher was mentioning. But in regards to the question of constitutionality, do you think that the courts will address the balance of risk between protecting the nation's security and the First Amendment rights of Americans, since there is access to other platforms, giving us the opportunity to express ideas the same way that TikTok does, but does not pose the same security threat that TikTok does.
I mean, it's interesting we talk about the First Amendment. I mean, as long as you have the ability to say it somewhere, I don't know that there's a First Amendment right to say it on the platform of your choice. So I'm not, I don't view this as much as a First Amendment issue. I mean, you look, TikTok, they censor content all the time. So while they're going into American courts and arguing the First Amendment, they censor content regarding Tiananmen Square. They censor content regarding Chinese Uyghurs. They will remove certain or modify certain subtitles. I've read on Chinese TikTok, they're doing things that are promoting mental health and well-being of Chinese citizens who are using the platform. But in the United States, they're feeding content that is actually detrimental and mentally harmful to citizens. And I'm not saying other platforms aren't doing that, but I think it's tough. I mean, the courts, just like Congress, is wrestling with what happens with Section 230. I mean, we're dealing with it in election law, that one of the laws that was written in 1993 that predates the internet, it just, the terms, the definitions haven't caught up. I mean, if you watch some of the congressional hearings and debates, I mean, some of the people we elect, I don't know that they know how to get on a cell phone, let alone create policy regarding it. So, yeah, I mean, I think the courts are struggling with the same issue that and I think about this a lot, is the technology moving faster than a representative constitutional republic can keep up, where, you wanted time for a law to settle in and the people to be educated and get used to it. I think it's a real challenge for us in our nation.
I have a quick follow-up to this one as well. This is one of the few things I actually do know something about. So you asked about kind of balancing national security and sort of First Amendment free speech, and who are we relying on to make that determination, and how can we evaluate whether they got it right? In the case of the TikTok versus Garland, the federal court litigation that they heard arguments on today, we quite literally just have to put our trust in the three judges that are deciding that case, because the federal government has made various arguments that this TikTok ban is necessary because of national security. But we don't know any of the specifics of the evidence that they're relying on to make that determination. It's been redacted from all of the public filings in the case. It's classified, it's protected to protect national security. The only three individuals outside of the Department of Justice who have any idea about the information, the evidence that will be needed to determine that balance are the three judges in that case. And we, the public, will never know what exactly they are relying on to make that decision. So ultimately, this is why we have an independent judiciary. It's why we have judges and justices that are insulated from the political process. But we have to trust this panel of three judges to properly evaluate and weigh the things that the government presents in that case, and protect our rights as citizens, and make sure that the government is really supporting with evidence the claims about national security that it's using to justify these types of restrictions on free speech and free expression.
So as you mentioned earlier, the discussion of TikTok's legality in the United States, if TikTok were to be banned in the United States or is ultimately forced to sell, what sort of precedent do you guys, referring to the panelists, think it was set for foreign companies seeking to operate in the United States, as well as domestic companies seeking to operate outside of the United States? And what sort of, we have like ideas of a few precedents that may set, but what are some that we may not consider that would be a big factor?
So last year I had the opportunity to go to Japan, South Korea, Israel, and the United Kingdom on a trade mission. And this was one of the #1 topics coming out of COVID, was this idea of either onshoring or friendshoring, meaning that what we saw during COVID was how much the West has outsourced medicines, medical devices, other things to foreign countries that may not be our friends. And I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party. And so there's no fundamental right for a nation to do trade or business with another nation. We as nations grant another nation access. And so it's not just the United States that's thinking about this. It's our allies all over the world that are thinking about, maybe it's better not to just get the cheapest product, but when we're funding our adversaries, but maybe we need to start thinking about this concept of onshoring or friendshoring, because it's a hostile world. It's a dangerous world. There's people out there who don't have our best interests at heart, and we need to take that seriously. We need to take that threat and that challenge seriously. I mean, I don't think any of us want to go back to what it was like in 2020. And there's ways to prevent that.
I just want to quickly respond to that. I think policy laws are not just a one point and then done. So now we're talking about banning TikTok, and other countries have already implemented some certain of restrictions on using TikTok. For example, Australia, Canada, I think UK has already have certain policies limited the use of TikTok. And in India, for example, at one point, TikTok was entirely banned in that country. But as time goes, there's negotiation happens. There's economic drive behind of that as well. So you can see that even if a law is developed or a regulation is established, it will continue change, depending on, the different countries' interests, or how, again, do not forget or ignore the economic drive behind of a lot of political debates as well.
This isn't really a question, but when talking about like TikTok's privacy, I feel like a conversation that is often overlooked is pressuring Google and Apple to also have better privacy, because part of the reason TikTok can data mine is because of Google and Apple, particularly Google, which makes the Android operating system. They don't really have very good privacy terms. So if they're pressured to do better, TikTok can't breach the privacy of the user effectively, and I think policies can be made to target them as well. But along with TikTok, we should pressure other social media to have better privacy terms, because they also often sell data just as much as TikTok. And I think that's very dangerous for national security as well.
I think that's a great point. And I'll say, really before they were really focused on TikTok, Congress was very much focused on Facebook. And somewhat Twitter, and then Twitter got bought out, and then Twitter wasn't as much a focus. But I still think when you look at not just social media platforms, but as you pointed out, our cell phones, companies that operate these cell phones. I mean, Google, I can't tell you, I have a TV at home that operates on Google, and sometimes it starts talking to me. I didn't call it, but it starts talking. I'm literally in a meeting, on a Zoom meeting, and it hears something that someone says on Zoom, and all of a sudden my TV's talking to me. So there's no doubt, and we've seen that too with even some devices from Amazon and stuff, right? This idea that devices are listening, that they're always on. And so what measures have been put in place to protect us? As of now, I would argue very little. And so in some respects, I worry that sometimes in the political world, there's the feel-good legislation, right? We did something. Doesn't mean they've solved the problem. Banning TikTok does not solve the broader problem, does not solve all the conversations we've had before. It addresses an element, right, with a specific company, but it doesn't address the underlying issues. And so very often you'll see in politics, you'll see a policy pass and go, we solved it, let's move on. and then, we're still suffering from the lack of inaction. So I think it's a very good point.
Well, and how many people read the terms of service when you get a new app or you sign on to a new website and your new service? How many people read the terms of service? I see one hand, and word for word you read them. Okay, well you're in the probably that 0.5% of Americans, because most of us don't. Most of us just we want to get on the app, we want to get onto whatever video we want to watch or movie we want to watch or whatever service we want, and we just scroll through it. And if you do sit down and read them, the things that we are agreeing to by clicking I accept would blow your mind. So maybe one of the things, and this is, now we're getting into contract law. So, we're hitting constitutional law, we're hitting national security policy, we're hitting contract law. Can we, because of the dangers of these things, both from U.S. companies, foreign companies, whoever, do we need to come up with a standardized terms of service that people, one set that Apple and Google, and maybe you give them a little leeway and they have to have it in really big print and have another layer of acceptance, but something, because we're giving away all of this to them, and they're using it. And once again, it goes back to a surveillance economy and convenience versus privacy.
I think that I agree. Other panelists are concerned about the dangers of the digital data. And I also think the concern is that when we are using social media, we tend to forget about some of the traditional ways that we consume information. And so earlier I heard that, if our device is beyond the social media or cell phone, we depend so much on smart TV, we depend so much on, even cars now is digital. So you don't have to learn how to drive cars as it used to be. So I think people often forgot that the new technology it's not really trying to replace some of the fundamental skills that we need to have as well. So we needed to learn beyond how policy can protect the safety of our information and data. So I think that should be, go just beyond of the policy. And the other thing is that I think it's good point being brought it up that how many people reading all those policies. So that's actually an issue is that, from public administration perspective, we try to advocate, design the policy that normal people can read, can understand. In the digital governance movement, not government, governance, so there's a difference on there. We actually wanted to promote the policy designed in simple sentence, not long paragraph that can point out the important things that you needed to know. Now, cookies, I'm not talking about the cookies you're eating, but on the website, right? The cookies, how many of you actually reading the setting of the cookies or every time bothered by, changing the set of the cookies? And I see more hands being raised up by reading the policies. You know why? Because those cookies settings are way easier to handle than the long policies. It's designed in a way that you can just click some buttons. You might not understand, each category of those cookies mentioned, that performance, activities, or whatever, but you kind of know that they always say essential cookies need to be on. You might not know what are essential cookies, but it's better than, long paragraph that you don't even bother to read one word and then you just agree, right? So I think that's the policy makers need to start thinking. Again, social media and technology changing the world. We cannot always using the old way to treat new things or handle the new things. At the same time, we cannot always just simply replace the old skills that we need. So it's a balance that we need to handle.
I just wanted to start off by saying thank you all for coming to inform us, but thank everyone also who came to be informed about this. But the main button issue that we're discussing here is TikTok specifically. And since you guys you three know the most about this, what do you think will happen in the appeal court?
I don't know that we know the most about it. Our expertise is probably pretty limited, and in terms of the courts, I think as the secretary, and I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn either. But I think the secretary hit on it earlier. They have information that no one else has, or actually, I think it was Dr. Seabrooks who hit on it earlier. They have information none of us have. And so it's really hard to say how the courts may do this. I've got to imagine that these judges are definitely weighing the bigger impact, because it doesn't stop with TikTok. It doesn't. And so a ruling that they issue is going to have ripple effects throughout technology in general. And with more and more of a reliance on technology, I don't see how they're not weighing that. So I am sure this is going to be, it's obviously highly watched, but I think it's going to be very carefully deliberated by those judges. And then again, it may end up in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Hi. So the panel seems to have a pretty healthy fear of TikTok, especially in schools and in government. My question is why that fear doesn't extend to other programs like Outlook or Excel. Is it just that it's a foreign actor? And if so, why do we like it whenever companies like Microsoft steal our data, but we don't like it when China does? And thanks, by the way.
My whole point has been, and if I haven't made it clear, I'll make it clear now. I think it's bigger than TikTok. I do think we should be concerned with what's happening with our data. I think there's a lot of research that shows what's going on with our data and how it's being used. And I think we have to look at what we talked a little bit earlier on, and I'm going to come back to as an educator. We have to look at the impact that technology is having on students, on their learning, on their mental health. And so I think it's very, very important that we understand technology, and because it develops so fast, I'm fairly good at technology, but not as good as my daughters. And, I look at my daughters and I'm thinking, they're not going to be as good as their kids and so on, right? Like, I think that's what we're going to continue to see. So how do we best prepare students for a future that's going to always be evolving and changing faster than we can imagine? Especially with AI coming on, because I think that's the real next big threat to how we handle and manage AI, because it can be used in such a way that could be very problematic. It can be used in a positive way, but it can be used in such a negative way. How are we creating the boundaries? And I don't think that's been discussed nearly enough.
I think TikTok is very different than the other technology companies that you mentioned, like Microsoft or, Google, right? Because it is the fact that it is a foreign entity and country can access to, this nation's personal data. And as I said, I think it's a fair concern about, even though there's no hard evidence has been found out that, Chinese government so far has using that individual data for any really obviously harm to this country yet. But even have that probability, are citizens okay with that? That's brought up my question earlier to you guys, that are you comfortable another country can access to your personal data? And are you comfortable your government can access to your data? And I think people may have a different comfortable level by answering that questions, that who own or who can access to your data. And that's why I think the TikTok case has been brought it up. And I also think this case may go beyond United States. I think the world is watching it. And United States may set up a model that how other countries now can handle their ways to, accept technology companies or international business enter their own countries. So I think it's a very important case ongoing, and it's going to set up some fundamental steps.
Yeah, and I don't want to leave anybody with the misperception that I care equally about U.S. companies or the U.S. government having all of the data that they have on all of us. But we're here tonight talking about TikTok. They are a foreign adversary. They don't, there aren't any independent companies in China. So they couch the way they talk in terms that relate to Americans. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't. Let me be careful, start mentioning certain names, but, American companies, the United States government doesn't own the companies. They don't own the means of production. In communist countries, they do. In communist China, the CCP, while they may give the pretense that these are independent companies, they're not. Ultimately, they determine whether that person, they're going to let you make money, they're going to let you be the CEO, but if you step out of line, if you go against their values, they're going to hammer that nail down. And they don't share our values when it comes to the rule of law. They don't share our values when it comes to free speech. They don't share our values when it comes to religious freedom. And so I think we can make a policy choice as a nation whether or not that country who is not our friend has the ability to have access to our markets and our people. And I think we reward our friends and don't reward our, and when I say enemies, I mean, no, we're not in a shooting war, but neither were we in a shooting war with the Soviet Union for 50 years. That doesn't mean we didn't battle them in all sorts of ways, economically. And that's what's happening now between the U.S. and China.
So I have another question. So one thing mentioned is algorithms pushing stuff in TikTok. So my question is, how do we find that balance between free speech? Because Facebook played like a major role in the Myanmar genocide by pushing certain rhetoric. And so I think like that's an important conversation to be had.
The algorithm on Facebook and TikTok, or just using Facebook as an example, before TikTok became popular, social media in general publish information and give you the feed, right? The algorithm is generating what they call general information. They don't tend to collect your personal data to generate personalized information. So that's a big difference that algorithms operate on TikTok. They fundamentally, before giving you any general information, they will first try to giving you personalized information first, regardless you like it or not. So they can, if you like it or not, you're giving a reaction. So they can continue calculate that information and then reproduce a information more personalized to fit into, your like. So that's to say that's giving a lot of power of instead of you publish your information to influence others, because Facebook was first designed based on friends network. The point is that if I share more information on my network, I can influence my followers on Facebook to consume similar information. The logic behind of TikTok is not designed in that way. They don't depending on your network to push information to your friends or family. They really trying to design each users have their own unique personalized information. So that's take away a little bit, actually, if you think about it. Let's take away a little bit your power of generating your own information to influence the others. Also, TikTok is the first company having this great idea of paying a lot of money to only a small group of TikTok influencer to actually, created, designed the information to attract the users. Which is, that's what I mentioned earlier. Vine was actually trying to stop that idea or not support that paying people to create information on social media to influence that. So if thinking about that, that also can be dangerous that if only a small group of people on social media can create a certain type of information, do you really have that freedom? Or do you have more control or influence by only a small group of people?
Well, I think we've asked some very big questions this evening. And if there's one common theme that I think has emerged from our panelists, it's that we're only at the very beginning as a society, as a world, of figuring out the answers to some of those big questions. And what I'll conclude by saying to the students in the room is that ultimately it's going to be your generation that is going to have to figure this out. You are the first generation that has really grown up with social media, with the internet, with smartphones being pretty much ubiquitous throughout your lives. And when you go out into the workforce, when you go out into governments and nonprofits, these are the decisions about what kind of society you want to have that your generation is going to have to make. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening to our event, and I'd also like to thank Secretary Byrd, President Spar, and Dr. Scher for being so generous with their time this evening. Thank you.